So today I want to go over a red tree Rafa build that is not only one of the strongest builds in the game, but because of how this build works, you can use basically any combination of weapons, ordnance, enhancement mods, pretty much any gear you actually want to use will work very well with this build, allowing you to do any endgame content with pretty much any of the weapons or other gear pieces in the game. And the reason that this build can be this versatile is because at a baseline, it's an action skill focused build, but the action skill of the red tree, which are Peacebreaker cannons, not only scale off of just action skill damage, but also of gun damage. So we can get a bunch of gun damage increases that will scale just our weapons and our action skill, meaning we can use a lot of different weapons very easily. And Peacebreaker cannons are just cannons that pop out of your shoulder. They just damage anything you're looking at or just anything in front of you. And because of a bunch of our other talents, they will also be really good at AoE, and they'll keep building up damage the longer you're in them. So they'll also just be really good against bosses as well. And a really important part of the build is our augment Bully Buddy Deluxe. So while Peacebreaker cannons are active, Rafa and your allies regenerate ammo into the magazine. This only works for your actual guns, your actual weapons. So it'll be regenning ammo to you when you have your weapon out. It'll also be dealing bonus incendiary damage, so just additional damage. On top of that, if your weapon is full, which can happen a lot because the other effect of this, your turrets will also have exploding bullets, making them better for AoE, but then you can press F again after this is active, and it will cause your guns to not consume ammo for 8 seconds, but the action skill drains quicker because a lot of the other elements we have, our action skill is up for a lot of the time anyway. So you have 8 seconds of using no ammo for your guns and your ordnance slot if you're not using a grenade mod. So any heavy weapon in your ordnance slot will use no ammo when this is active as well. So if you want to use a heavy weapon, you can even focus this build around using a heavy weapon and have infinite ammo with it, because this also doesn't have a cooldown. So you just have 8 seconds of no ammo usage, then you just pop it again when the duration is up. Then the capstone we're using is double auto shot, which turns your cannons into shotguns that just have pellets, and those pellets can also ricochet off of enemies. So we have a bunch of different ways of ricocheting projectiles around, and turning these into shotguns just does incredibly strong damage. And then going into our passive, starting with the red tree, we have increase the gun damage, which again will scale our gun damage and our Peacebreaker cannons. We have deft hands, which increases the fire rate of our Peacebreaker cannons and us. We have whenever we critically strike an enemy, our action skill duration is restored, so 15% of it. It has a cooldown of 4 seconds, but our Peacebreaker cannons themselves will make sure this is always procced, because our Peacebreaker cannons, as they are shotguns with pellets now, any one of those pellets that crits will count as a crit to restore our action skill duration. Then we deal increased damage from all sources, and this is based upon how high our shields are, so up to 30%, and this is doubled when our shields are at max capacity. So especially early on in fights, and if you're able to stay at say longer ranges and not get hit, you're able to do a lot of additional damage. Then we're going down to the left tree. Our indirect projectiles gain increased damage, and indirect projectiles are action skill weapons, thrown guns, and projectiles not fired from your guns. So this will actually encompass a lot of different things, and even at a baseline, if you're not using a bunch of things that this would be considered as indirect projectiles, our Peacebreaker cannons are still considered that. Then all indirect projectiles now deal bonus incendiary damage. This is doubled if they already deal incendiary damage, so this is just additional damage on top of everything else. Then we have 1 point into hostile acquisition, so our indirect projectiles gain lifesteal, so we'll just constantly be lifestealing from our Peacebreaker cannons, from our grenades, and a bunch of other things. Then we have lateral plinking, so our indirect projectiles now have a chance to ricochet. This is 25% at a baseline, but you can also get increases to this. Mine's at 50%, so this is just massive damage increases, bullets ricocheting everywhere. Then we have the middle tree, so our ordnances deal bonus damage of our current weapons element. And keep in mind, if you're using a heavy weapon, which is a weapon you actually have to pull out and isn't a grenade that you can just throw, you have to have a weapon out with an element on it if you say want to use a rocket launcher. So whatever was your currently equipped weapon when you use your heavy weapon is what will take the damage off of this. Then we have Pain's reaction, so your guns gain a chance to ricochet off of enemies with status effects, and it's 15% per status effect, and we'll have a bunch of different ways just from our Peacebreaker cannon to apply different status effects. So we'll have a really big chance for our guns and our Peacebreaker cannons to ricochet more projectiles off of enemies. And also keep in mind, with all of this stuff mixed together, all the different ways we have to ricochet projectiles around, with our lateral plinking, with our Pain reaction, and with just our capstone, all those can ricochet projectiles around. And it seems that based upon all those being combined, my ricochets are currently actually dealing about double the damage of the initial shots. You can actually go test this on target dummies, where the damage buildup on the initial target dummy you're hitting will actually be around half of the ricochet damage. So these ricochets are actually dealing some pretty massive damage, which is a really big way we're doing a lot of AoE damage. Then enemies damaged by our Peacebreaker cannons have an increased chance to receive status effects, so that'll just help us apply the status effects even more. While aiming with our gun, we deal bonus shock damage, and this is bonus shock damage of any damage we're dealing. So we ADS, we deal bonus shock damage, and this bonus shock damage builds up the longer we're ADSing. So if you can just keep ADSing for a long period of time, any damage you're dealing will give that bonus shock damage. Whether it's ordnance, whether it's your Peacebreaker cannons, grenades, your weapons, anything will be dealing that bonus shock damage, which will build up to a lot of additional damage. Then we go over, we have 1 point in the green tree, which is Midnight Oil. Our action skills deal bonus corrosive damage per stack. This builds up and just deals more and more corrosive damage. But the main reason we're using this is because this can now apply the corrosive damage over time effect, so the status effect. So just another status effect to be able to ricochet rounds more. Then our final 2 points is the Thrill in the blue tree, which is an overdrive skill. We just gain increased fire rate and even more fire rate while overdrive is active. So just some additional fire rate for even more damage. But that brings us to our specialization points, and I currently have 56 points invested, and that's important because as I get more and more points and I'm able to unlock more of these nodes, we will actually change up what nodes we have socketed. But the first thing you want to go to is 10 into runner, 10 into sharpshooter, so you can go get daredevil, so you can go down this row. And the first node we're going to be using is now with caffeine, so you reduce your action skill cooldown when your rep kit is activated. So in between fights or when your action skill falls off, you can use your rep kit and massively reduce the cooldown of your action skill. We're not using I am a gun. This gives gun damage scaling to your action skill. This does nothing for Peacebreaker cannons because they already scale from gun damage, but then a honed mine, which just increases the critical strike damage and chance of our action skill, which is just going to increase our damage. And then I want more points into sharpshooter to get in the zone. When you ADS, you gain increased gun damage and critical strike damage, which will just massively buff up our damage. And we're already going to want to be aiming a lot because that gives us that bonus shock damage as well. Then we're using one shot, one kill, which is a kill skill. Excess damage will be stored for your next gunshot. This can help with mobbing and stuff, but as I get more and more points and I'm able to put 20 points into brute, I will be changing this to riddle you this, which whenever you deal gun damage, you gain increased gun damage, stacking up to 50 times. So at max stacks, this will be 50% increased gun damage, which will be massive for us and our Peacebreaker cannons. And that will most likely be the 4 different nodes we have socketed over here, the 3 we're currently using, and then we will switch out one shot, one kill for riddle you this, which will just be massive damage increases. And like I mentioned, you can use pretty much any gear with this build that you want. Do you want to use a weapon with Torg stickies to build up a bunch of stickies on the target and have them all blow up for more and more damage? You can do that, and it's actually super strong against bosses because we can activate our augment that gives us infinite ammo for 8 seconds and have a fully automatic weapon that applies Torg stickies to a target and just have 8 seconds of fully automatic spraying Torg stickies onto a target. Then once you reload, they all start to blow up, and while they're blowing up, you can ADS to add more shock damage to that. That's why I've been using this weapon here. You'll see in some of the footage when I'm using this, so you can use this on bosses and destroy bosses very easily because you just put so many Torg stickies on the target. I actually have 3 different weapons that I'm using that for right now, but any other weapon you want to use is really good. I've also been using the Linebacker, which is an incredibly strong gun. It's really good for this build as well. And I do have a video going over this weapon as I think one of the strongest legendaries in the game. You essentially just shoot out these 4 exploding bouncing projectiles. The more they bounce, the more damage and damage radius they have. And because this build doesn't require a bunch of other gear to be good, you can add in different enhancements to whatever you want to use. So for instance, because I'm using a lot of Torg weapons and the main weapon I'm using is Torg, I have a Torg enhancement that has Headringer. Guns with Torg license parts deal more damage and have more damage radius, which will just make these bouncing explosives from the Linebacker deal more damage and have a bigger radius to hit more targets. You'll see on really large bosses, this thing absolutely destroys them. Is one of the best weapons in the game. That'll still help the damage of our Torg stickies as well, so that's incredibly strong. But again, any weapon you want to use that's a decent weapon is going to work well with this build. When I'm just doing normal content, I'll just be using a grenade. I've been using the Swarm, which is a really good grenade. It just keeps splitting out more and more grenades that track targets. I really like it because it tracks targets, so I can just throw them and worry about using my weapons and they just track targets. Generally does pretty good damage. But again, because of our infinite ammo ability, you can use rocket launchers or saw blades or any heavy weapon, you can activate our augment, pull out your heavy weapon, and have infinite ammo for any heavy weapon for 8 seconds. You'll see some of the footage. I'm using this Raven Fire here to just shoot infinite tracking rockets. That's really good as well. That infinite ammo doesn't work with your grenades. It only works with heavy weapons. But if you find a really good heavy weapon like the Raven Fire or even the disc jockey that bounces around these discs that deal more damage per bounce, those are really good weapons to use with that infinite ammo and can be really good in certain situations. And for the rep kit, you can again use whatever you want, but I like the enrage effect. It gives you a massive damage buff for 6 seconds. You take more damage, but the damage buff is massive. Then I have rep kit cooldown reduction. I want to be able to have a rep kit up as much as I want, both for that damage increase, but also to be able to use it if our action skill goes down so we can get it back up much more quickly. You can use whatever you want for your shield. I'm using the super soldier. When your shield is full, you gain fire rate, movement speed, and regenerate ammo. Also, if you have a heavy weapon in your hand when your shield is full, this ammo regen also works for your heavy weapons. So if I say have my Raven Fire out that has 4 rounds, if I have 1 round but my shields are full, it will quickly regenerate up to full, which is super strong. And the super soldier shield is just really good, but you can use whatever shield you like to use. Then for our class mod, we're using Instigator. This is really good on boss fights for our Peacebreaker cannons. Whenever they fire at an enemy, you gain a stack of Instigator that increases the damage of your Peacebreaker cannons. It does reset the stacks when it switches targets, but on a single target boss, you get 2% damage for every stack. So as you're in longer boss fights, your Peacebreaker cannons will just deal more and more damage. Also has action skill duration and kinetic damage roll on it. So just really good damage rolls, and the legendary effect on this is really strong as well. And then for our firmware, we're using 3 into Deadeye. We mainly want for the gun critical damage increase, which will affect our guns and Peacebreaker cannons. And the third roll, every critical hit grants 15% critical damage per stack up to maximum of 5 stacks. And our Peacebreaker cannons will crit very frequently, so this will stack up very quickly, just giving us massive critical strike damage increase. Then we have 2 into GUJFC, which is an action skill firmware, so action skill cooldown rate and then action skill damage as a second roll, which would just be really good for our Peacebreaker cannons. But that's the entirety of this build, and this build has just been incredibly fun for any gameplay you're going to be doing. This build is not only just really good for mobbing, especially with all the different combinations you can do with infinite ammo with your Bullet Buddy Deluxe, but it's also incredibly strong for boss fights because our Peacebreaker cannons will be building up more and more damage as the boss fight goes longer and longer. We'll be able to use our Bullet Buddy Deluxe for infinite ammo to be able to burst down bosses really quickly with any number of heavy weapons or normal weapons, and you'll just be dealing ridiculous amounts of damage with this when you're in combat, especially when you're against just big groups of enemies. You'll be able to stay in your action skill almost 100% of the time, and you can just use whatever gear you want with this build and it'll still be incredibly strong. So this might be the most versatile build in the game while also just being ridiculously strong. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.